Welcome to creating a high-performing project team. Projects succeed or fail largely because of the people. As a project manager, you must assemble, develop, and lead a high-performing team that would deliver the work effectively, navigate conflict, and stay engaged with stakeholders. That is why the people management domain makes up a significant part of the PMP exam content outline. But why does it matter? In a predictive project, team structure is often hierarchical. Clarity of roles are very crucial. In an agile team, for instance, they are self-organizing, so empowerment and psychological safety are vital. In a hybrid, we blend both. You need flexibility to adapt team structure as work shifts. Let's take a look at some of the lessons and its objective. Number one, determine project team members' requirements, appraisal skills, maintain knowledge transfer. That you will see in the echo task of 1.2. But what is the key concept here? Is to identify what skills are needed to deliver the project work packages. Two, you want to assess existing team members' capability versus the gap. Number three, you want to plan for cross-training, mentoring, and documentation to reduce knowledge loss. So in a traditional environment, for instance, in a construction project, you might need a civil engineer with local code knowledge, a procurement specialist for contracts, and a site supervisor with experience managing subcontractors. For in an agile environment, in a software Scrum team, you need the developer skilled in a specific tech stack, a QA engineer, or perhaps a DevOps skill. And then the team does general pair programming or cross-functional trainings to spread the knowledge. While in a hybrid, for instance, in pharmaceutical projects, your R&D team may work predictively on lab trials, but your regulatory compliance team might operate more agilely. You must ensure knowledge flow across those silos. Practical tips I would tell you here is that you want to use a skill metric to map current or required skills, then plan upscaling your actions. And then number two, collectively define project ground rules, right? Now, the key concept here will be team ground rules clarify how team members will communicate, how they will handle conflicts, they respect time zones for virtual teams, and also share accountability. Rules that would align with organizational culture and also the project context. So for instance, in a traditional environment, the government projects might have strict rules about approval hierarchy. Team ground rules should provide clear document control practices, while in an agile example, for instance, the Scrum team must or may use working agreements like no phone in stand-ups, commitment to sprint goals, and also respect safe to fail conversations. For instance, for a hybrid team, a global marketing rollout, your team members would agree that all stand up perhaps on video to build trust across culture. And then what I would say here for practical tips for some of us who want to manage and know how to do this practically, you want to facilitate a kickoff workshop to define those ground rules, right? Those rules together, and then build it in as critical as possible. And then number three, you want to determine a negotiation strategy and a negotiation agreement. Now, the key concept in determining the negotiation strategy is to, one, you negotiate for resources, budget, roles, and timeline, both internally with functional managers and also externally with vendors. And number two, for this, you want to be able to understand stakeholders' interests, not just positions. So for instance, in looking at it in a traditional environment, you want to negotiate with external vendors for service contracts. You want to balance cost, you want to balance quality and also timeline. But in an agile, like a product owner wants to negotiate scope trade-offs with stakeholders when the team's capacity is at risk. And for a hybrid, you want to negotiate with a shared service team to ensure that your agile team has dedicated UX designers during critical sprints. So these are all forms of creating negotiation strategies for different roles. And of course, for a practical concept here, you want to prepare a partner. That is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, so you know your fallback position. So let's take a look at the fourth thing here we're going to be learning. That is organize around team strength and support team accountability. The key concept we're going to learn here is to leverage people's unique strength to boost morals and productivity. And number two, we want to use tools like the RASI or the responsibility board. So for instance, in a traditional, an engineering project assigns complex design tasks to senior engineers while the junior staffs handle routine calculations. And then for an agile, the Scrum encourages shared accountability. Everyone on the dev team owns delivery of sprints, commitments. And then in a hybrid, a marketing campaign might have a waterfall style content approval, but agile like iterations from A/B testing, rules must be clear. And for us, in a real life perspective, you want to do a strength finder or a similar assessment to match tasks to people's natural ability. So you don't put people in areas that they would not flourish. And then another thing we're going to learn is to ensure trainings for team members or stakeholders. Here, the key concept here would be training should address skill gaps and ensure everyone understands the project approach. And then number two, stakeholders training is just as vital. They should know how to engage effectively. And then this, looking at ensuring trainings for team members in a traditional environment, is that we need to train new PMs on the company's document management system, for instance. And then in an agile, you want to run the agile coaching sections to stakeholders new in Scrum so they don't disrupt ceremonies. And then in a hybrid, you want to train line managers on how the hybrid governance model works so they don't actually do micromanagement for the agile teams. And what we need to know practically here is to always include time for just-in-time training. Just for instance, the user story writing workshop mid-time into your project. And then the sixth part here is to evaluate effectiveness of a virtual team's engagement. The key concept in this is that your virtual teams must need tools, right, norms, and trust to work well. And then you want to evaluate regularly. Are we doing well? Are people participating? Is there collaboration working here? So if we look at this in a traditional environment, like in a multinational predictive project, may need robust SharePoint sites and the virtual meetings to keep everyone aligned. And then in an agile, for example, the Scrum Masters must ensure that remote stand-ups are short, engaged, and also inclusive. And then for a hybrid, you want to run periodic virtual team health checks. That's, you want to do quick surveys, you want to check pulses to spot disengagement. Usually in real life application, what we use here is digital Kanban boards. We use chat apps, and then we create norms for time zones so that we are able to integrate different people. Here would be rich consensus or support agreement. The key concept we're learning here is good decision making relies on consensus when possible. Everyone should feel heard, right? And consensus does not mean 100% engagement, right? Or 100% agreement. It means people would support the decision no matter how what. So in a traditional environment, you want to gain sign off on scope changes after a thorough impact assessment. And in an agile, for instance, during a sprint planning, the team would reach consensus on how much work to commit to. And for a hybrid environment, a steering committee, for instance, can reach consensus on reprioritizing features while leaving the delivery to the agile team. Practically, how this is done, we use facilitation techniques like dot voting, multi-voting, or Delphine opinion techniques. So for industry examples, for instance, I like to give is, for instance, in construction, in a traditional environment, we could have fixed WBS, strict schedule, clear chain of command, very clear. And in a hybrid, we can design a phase predictive fixed field changing handling iteration. So, and then for an agile but modular construction can use Kanban, right? And in a software environment, in a traditional environment, we are predictive for large ERP rollout. And in a hybrid, you have predictive integration, agile for user interfaces. And then if that's for hybrid. So if it's agile, you're fully Scrum or we have the XP teams. And for instance, in a healthcare example or industry, for a traditional, we use the waterfall for clinical trials. In a hybrid setting, predictive for compliance, agile for patient engagement tools, and for an agile for digital health app, for instance. Some of the key take-homes we want to look at here for the PMP exams is that you want to know your ECHO task and enablers. They show what you need to demonstrate as project managers. You want to understand how the same principles will apply differently, both in a predictive environment, in an agile environment, and also in a hybrid environment. You want to know practical tools such as your skill matrix, ground rules, your RASI chart, your working agreements, virtual team checks, negotiation plans, and all of it. So in putting all of this into practice, number one, you want to do a kickoff meeting every project. You want to kick off every project by building trust. You want to run ground rule workshop. You want to use your skill mapping to also close gaps very fast. Number three, you want to keep training simple and on time. You don't want to overload at the start. You want to check your team engagement, especially virtually, regularly. And then you want to practice negotiation. You want to know how your interests and alternatives lie. So what exactly is the PMP ECHO? The PMP exam content outline, which is what we call the ECHO, is a blueprint published by PMI that explains different aspects. I'm talking about number one, domain. And what are domain? These are the broad knowledge areas you must master as a project manager for your PMP exams. And we have three domains. We have the people domain, which is about 42% of the questions in your exams. We have the process domain, which is about 50% of your exam questions. And you also have your business environment domain, which is 8% of the exam. So each domain reflects critical responsibilities and skills you as a project manager must demonstrate. We also have another thing we call the task. Task describes what you as a project manager must do within a domain. They define the key activities that shows your competencies. So for instance, in a people domain, a task is build a team. In a process domain, a task might be manage project changes. And then we have another thing here, which is what we call the enablers. Enablers are practical examples of how to perform those tasks. They are not exhaustive. They illustrate what good practice should look like. So for instance, in a task which is to build a team, we have enablers which could be appreciate your team members' skills, determine required competencies. So you see, enablers are the practical examples of how to perform those tasks. Another could be maintain team knowledge transfer. So when you study or practice, you must ask, am I able to do such enablers well? So how it connects to your team and your work. So for exam preparedness, you must understand each domain's weight. Like for the people management, we say it's 42%. So for instance, the team building is a huge focus. So be ready for scenario-based questions, which we're going to even show you at the end of the model. You want to often test how to apply those tasks and enablers in a tricky scenario. You want to tie everything back to this ECHO. If you know the task plus the enabler, you want to answer confidently. So for real work, right, that's in real life experience, you want to be able to use those tasks and enablers like your checklist. They are very practical. For example, when you build a team, you don't just hire people, you check their skills, you address their training needs, you agree on ground rules, you maintain knowledge transfer. This would ensure your team performs at a very high level and risks are reduced. Your training materials, right, like the lessons on creating a high-performing team, will clearly show what domains you are covering. So for instance, like you're covering the people domain, what task the lessons would support. So for instance, you build a team. What enablers you're practicing? That is, for instance, you want to define ground rules, you want to negotiate agreement. This would help you focus your learning, identify your weak spots, and practically with real deliverables like the metrics you're going to learn, the team charter, and all of that. Another thing I want us to look at is to understand the deliverables and the tools connected to those tasks and enablers. Now, PMI and good PMP exam prep would always link your task enablers to real PM deliverables you would use on a project. So, for example, build the team, you would need deliverables like your team charter and deliverables like your skill metrics and tools like your RASI chart, tools like your working agreement. Now, you don't memorize tools for the sake of exams. You just need to learn how and why we use those tools. I want to reiterate again how the ECHO map is in practice or put in practice. So for your ECHO, for example, in creating a high-performing team, you know the domain is what? People, correct? The task is build a team. And then the enablers will be to appraise team skills, define ground rules, etc. And some of the tools that we're going to use there will be the team charter, the kickoff meetings or the kickoff workshop, and also the working agreement. So some of the key take-homes we need to see here is that don't just memorize tasks and enablers, understand the logic behind them. Another thing again is you want to practice using deliverable tools that will map to those tasks and then think, how would I do this in a predictive environment, in an agile environment, in a hybrid environment? That's exactly what the exam tests you. So let me clarify more again on this particular one, which is giving you examples based on domains, moving to tasks, moving to enablers, and also examples and tools. So for instance, in the domain, which is people, one of the tasks there is to build a team. The enablers there is to determine required team members' competencies. Another enabler there is to appraise team skills. Another enabler there is to maintain team knowledge transfer. So for instance, in a traditional, which is a predictive environment, so for instance, in construction, an example would be that you are the PM for a hospital build, you review the work breakdown structure, and you realize you need structural engineers with local licensing, you assess the team skills, you would hire subcontractors to close the gap, you will create a lesson learned register to share the site management tips with new supervisor. For instance, in a hybrid and in the industry, maybe in marketing, a good example would be a global campaign uses a predictive plan for the main event launch, but social media rollouts iterative weekly. You would appraise the digital team skills. You would fill gaps in TikTok content creation. You would arrange a training sprint while your senior copywriters help mentor junior ones. So for in an agile environment where the industry is probably software development, right? For instance, a Scrum Master works with the product owner to check if the dev team has the skills for a new AI feature. They could pair up less experienced developers with senior ones for pair programming to ensure knowledge transfer. Another example, for instance, in the domain again, people, the next would be to define team ground rules. The enablers here would be for us to communicate organizational policies, define acceptable behavioral norms, establish escalation procedures. So giving an example again would be, for instance, in the traditional and in the industry manufacturing, you could, for instance, manage an example line upgrade, which you want to create ground rules, including clear safety protocols, sign up required for any change, and escalation for issues to the product manager. In a hybrid setting, maybe in the industry like pharmaceutical, for instance, a drug trial, predictive phases need rigid compliance of your SOPs, standard operating procedures, while R&D ideation workshop follows more flexible brainstorming norms. You want to hold a kickoff to define how these rules will blend and when formal reporting would be applied. And in an agile setting, for instance, in the industry like fintech, an example would be your Scrum team working agreement would include, we respect everyone's time zone. We use cameras for our daily stand-up and we escalate blockers within 24 hours in the PO. Some of the practical tools we would use here will be team working agreement documents. So another, again, in the domain of people, we could have negotiate your project agreement. And the enablers here will be to assess priorities of all parties, develop a negotiation strategy, confirm an agreement documentation, and the list goes on again. So for instance, in a traditional environment, in an oil and gas, you want to negotiate with your contractors to build extra drilling equipment. You would identify identify your fallback, your partner. You want to lease from another vendor if rates are too high. You want to clarify your scope, liability clauses, and you want to sign a formal contract. But while in a hybrid or in the industry like telco, for instance, an example could be a predictive rollout needs fiber cable supply from vendor, but installation crew work in agile sprints. You want to negotiate with procurement to prioritize agile ready purchase order. And then, for instance, in an agile environment for an industry like software, an example could be a scrum master negotiating with the product owner to reduce scope for the next sprint, that since the new feature is bigger than estimated. So practical tools here will be like the partner, the stakeholder interest log. You see how all of this builds down to the people, to the task, to the enablers. Another domain, people. One of the tasks here is to organize around the team strength. Enablers will be to assess your team strength and weakness. You want to assign tasks based on strength. You want to provide support for accountability. And we want to look at it in different industries, like for traditional in an industry like construction. For example, you want to assign the most experienced site manager to a complex excavation area with known soil stability issue, while junior engineers could handle routine work with supervisors. And then a hybrid, for instance, industry like a product dev, the hardware design is predictive, software UI is agile. So you want to structure teams so that creative designers will focus on prototyping while experienced coders would handle integration tasks. And for instance, in agile, right, in a game development industry, a Scrum team splits task as a team member skilled at AI engineers or handles the NPC logic, while the strong 3D artist focuses on character modeling, for instance, right? Some of the practical tools here will be the RASI chart or even the Kanban board. Another again is the domain area of people, which is the task ensuring training and knowledge transfer. The enablers here will be to identify the training needs, provide the training resources, ensure documentation of knowledge transfer. Examples again could be in the traditional and in the industry like healthcare. For example, you want to onboard a new PM for hospital system upgrade. You want to get formal training on the client's EHR policy and also data privacy standards. And then another could be in the hybrid and, for instance, in the industry of manufacturing. For example, you want to train a team on predictive product controls for capital equipment while training the same team to use agile tools for quick designs, sprints on production in line tweaks. So in an agile environment, like in a tech startup example, a new developer joins mid-sprint. You want to provide onboarding documents and pair them with a mentor for rapid ramp up. So examples would be of tools that we can use will be the training plan, the knowledge transfer log. Another area here again in the domain of people, another task is to evaluate virtual team engagement. Some of the enablers would be to use communication tools, evaluate virtual engagement, adjust approach as needed. So examples again in the traditional or in the industry of engineering, for instance, a multi-site team, you would use an MS team for weekly checkups. You want to track attendance, you want to see who's disengaged. While in a hybrid, for instance, finance industry, the project use Jira dashboard for agile works, while milestone updates happens via formal predictive reports. You want to check if both channels are working well for your remote members. In an agile, like in the industry of SaaS development, for instance, the virtual stand-ups are dragging. You want to switch to an asynchronous video updates plus a Slack thread where surveying the team to confirm it works better. As practical tools here could be your virtual health check, or we call it the virtual team health check template. Now, another again in the people domain, another task is to reach consensus and support agreement. Enablers will be to facilitate team decision making. Ensure everyone's voice is heard. You want to gain final sign-off. Industries like in construction for traditional, a change request. So stakeholders will debate cost versus safety impact. You want to facilitate a meeting. You want to document decisions. You want to secure final signature. In a hybrid, maybe in the industry of retail, for instance, a steering group prioritizes roll-up dates for new stores using voting techniques, predictive for lease sign-up, agile for merchandising. And then in the agile, like maybe in industry, like in the mobile app development, an example could be during sprint planning, the team disagrees on the story points, and the scrum masters will facilitate a conversation until consensus is reached. Some of the practical tools we use here could be like our decision log plus what we call our dot voting or multi-voting. So some of the key take homes here is that each domain and enabler is your practical guide. You don't just memorize, you want to see how to translate into your day-to-day project management actions. You want to adapt how to apply them to fit predictive, agile, and also the hybrid way of working. You want to use simple tools, working agreements, skills metrics, checklists, negotiation logs, and virtual engagement teams to work even better. So let's take a look at some of the enablers, deliverables, tools as well. Number one, support diversity and inclusion. Why does it matter? High-performing team would leverage diverse perspective, backgrounds, and ideas. Inclusion would ensure everyone feels safe to contribute. Some of the deliverables here will be the team charter with diversity or inclusion principles, working agreements that will protect psychological safety, and also diversity metrics if relevant for reporting. Some of the tools here will be the team kickoff workshop templates, retrospective to review inclusion, anonymous feedback channels. For instance, in a traditional environment, a government infrastructure project, you want to ensure your site crew has multi-language safety signage and briefing. The team charter should include respect for cultural norms. And then in a hybrid, for instance, a global marketing team could use local cultural consultants to adapt a global campaign, including inclusivity. And in an agile, in Scrum, the Scrum Master would ensure all voices are heard in daily stand-ups and also call out dormant or silent behavior. Number two is the appraise team skills, which is the Echo 1.6. Why does this really matter? You must understand what your team can do today versus what they need to succeed. Some of the deliverables will be for us to use the skill metrics, individual development plans, which you call the IDPs, training needs assessment. And some of the tools that we'll be needing here will be the skill assessment templates, the performance review, your peer review, like 360 feedback. And let's take a look at an example here. For in the engineering team firm, you want to conduct annual skills review to align staff skills with upcoming projects. In a hybrid, you want to do quick skill metrics for an IT integration, for instance, predictive for infra setup, and also agile for the iterative testing. And then in an agile example, the team needs a simple T-shaped diagram to visualize whose skill in what and pair people up for growth. Number three is to determine your team members' requirements. And why does this really matter? You can't build a team without knowing what work needs doing and what skills are required. Some of the deliverables will be your resource requirement plan, your role description, even your RASI chart. Some of the tools here would be your WBS, work breakdown structure, your responsibility metrics, and also your job description templates. So for instance, in a traditional environment, you plan a construction project WBS, you want to map tasks to required specialty, and you want to hire contractors to fill the gap. In a hybrid, for instance, in a product launch, we need predictive roles for logistics and agile roles for digital marketing. And in an agile, for instance, the product owner and the scrum master needs to clarify what skills are needed for the next feature increments and recruit or contract specialists. Number four is continuously assess and refresh team skills. Why does this matter? People must keep learning to stay effective as project evolves. Deliverables will be updated, skill metrics, training schedule, mentorship program. And some of the tools we would use here would be the lesson learned register, retrospective for skill gaps, and internal knowledge base. For instance, in a traditional environment, on a multi-year project, for example, you plan annual training updates for new standards and safety certificates. In a hybrid, During a digital transformation, for instance, you want to assess if people need new tools training midway through the rollout. In an agile, the retrospective surfaces the need for new cloud skills. The team books just-in-time training for that. And then number 5 is to maintain team transfer and also knowledge. And why does this really matter? If people leave, critical know-how shouldn't work out of the door as well. So some of the deliverables will be the knowledge transfer plan, knowledge bases, the SOP, that is the standard operating procedures. And some of the tools to use here will be the lesson learned register, pairing or scheduling program. It's your project repository. For instance, in a traditional environment, you require that your senior engineers will create a handover document before moving to a new site. And in an agile environment, a Scrum team rotates people through tasks to spread know-how and uses shared documentation. While in a hybrid, your key regulatory findings are documented predictively, but the agile team also needs to capture FAQ in there. Number 6 is discuss responsibility with team. Why does this matter? Clear roles avoid confusion and conflicts. Deliverables here will be the RASI chart, your team charter, your role description, and some of the tools will be the kickoff meeting, responsibility workshop, and also your visual boards. For instance, in a traditional, for example, you want to hold a kickoff to explain who signs off on design, who inspects work, and who reports issues. And in a hybrid, a global team agrees that the predictive milestones need formal sign-off, but day-to-day agile tasks are self-managed. For example, again, in an agile environment, a Scrum Master would clarify the PO owns the backlogs, the dev team owns delivery, and also stakeholders respect all the pre-sprint commitments. Now, putting all of this together in a simple cheat sheet, the enablers would be support diversity and inclusion. Deliverables would be team charter. The tools would be kickoff workshop. And then in appraisal team, another enabler, appraise team skills. The deliverable is the skill metrics. The tool is the assessment template. And for instance, an example will be the annual skill review. And then we have another enabler, which is to determine team requirements. The deliverable here is a resource plan, and the tool here will be the WBS and the RASI. And for example, you want to map roles to task. Another enabler is continuously assess skills, and then the deliverable is to update skill metrics, and the tool is retrospective, and then, for example, just-in-time training. And then another would be to maintain knowledge transfer. The deliverables is your knowledge base, and then your tools is your lesson learned, and for example, your SOPs and wikis. Another enabler is to discuss responsibility, and your deliverables is your RASI chat, and your tool here will be your kickoff meeting. And of course, an example will be clear roles at startup. So practically, you want to know and always tie your enablers to back up your real artifacts. You don't just talk, you want to show tools, right? And you want to practice with your team. You want to hold real kickoff meetings. You want to build skill metrics and do simple RASI for simple projects. You want to adapt to the environment. Either it's virtually, use cloud tools. If it's agile, you want to use vision boards and working agreements. Let's take a look at some of the deliverables and tools. Skill list. What is it? A simple but powerful record of the skills your team has or any gap. Why? It will help you appraise your team skills. It will help you determine your team requirements. It will also help you continuously assess and refresh your team. For instance, in a traditional environment for your engineering firm, you keep an updated skill list for all technical staffs to assign to new bridge or a road project. In an agile, a Scrum team does a T-shaped skill chart to see who can cross-train in testing, DevOps or UX. And then in a hybrid environment, you run a skill inventory at the start of a big predictive rollout, and then check up or check it before each agile iteration to ensure that your team is still covered. So you see, the skill list is really important. Another is your resource schedule. Now, what's that? A timeline shows when and where resources, people are needed. Why? To connect to determine your team requirement, to help clarify responsibility and avoid overload. In a traditional environment, for instance, on a construction site, the PM could use a resource schedule to line up the concrete crews, inspectors, safety staff by phase. In an agile, your resource scheduling is less formal, but Kanban or sprint capacity planning does the same thing to ensure people are available. And in a hybrid, your predictive Gantt charts integrates with your Scrum sprint board to see when business SMEs must be available for user testing. RASI metrics. And what's that? It clarifies who is responsible, who is accountable, who should be consulted and informed for a task. And why is this important? You want to directly support, discuss responsibility within the team. You want to support clarity when you determine team requirement. And for instance, in a traditional environment, you want to draft a RASI for your construction build out so everyone knows who signs off on design versus who requires or who reviews the contract. You want to know who is responsible for certain tasks. And then in an agile, which is less formal, the Scrum roles naturally clarifies responsibility, but the RASI might help or cross-team dependencies. And in the agile, you run the agile sprints, but major sign-offs use a RASI to keep leadership aligned. Right? So the related template here would be what we call the RASI chart or the RASI metrics template. And then another is the pre-assignment tool. What's it? It's a template or HRO tool that will help pre-assign specific people to specific roles. And why is this important? It supports determine team requirements and also help team appraise team skills. So for instance, in a traditional environment for a global event, you can pre-assign top speakers and VIP handlers months in advance. And in an agile, in less rigid context, you might pre-assign specialist contractors for critical sprints. And then in a hybrid, you want to reserve experts resources for the predictive core build, then bring them into the agile phase for support. So some of the related tools we would use for pre-assignment would be your HR resource allocation system. Another is the virtual team. Why is it important? It's not a deliverable, but in context, it requires special tools. Why? You want to support all enablers, especially diversity and inclusion, and maintain knowledge transfer. We use this in a traditional environment where a multi-site construction project uses SharePoint or MS Teams to keep site and office staff connected. And in an agile, the Scrum team uses Slack or Miro or a digital dashboard or Kanban board for real-time collaboration. And in a hybrid, predictive planning in Primavera or MSP, and then agile sprints in Jira connected through a common knowledge base. And then number 6, let's look at technology. What's it? The system that enables all of this, project management software, the collaboration tools, file sharing, and all of that. And why is this important? To support knowledge transfer and also to support diversity and inclusion by giving equal access. So for instance, in a traditional environment where we use maybe the MSP or Microsoft Primavera and P6 for schedules, shared drives for document controls. And then in the Agile, we could use Jira, Aselo, Trello for backlogs, and so on and so forth. And then in a hybrid, a portfolio tool to link waterfall milestones with the Agile team deliverables. And then we have another, which is rates. What's that? That is resource rates. Cost of people, contractors, or consultants. Why is this important? It's related to determine team requirements. Do you have a budget for your right skills? It's important for negotiation and also for your resource assignment. And for instance, in a traditional environment, you estimate resource rates by external contractors, and Agile, for instance, budget ground rails for capacity, whether you can hire a new specialist for a sprint. And then in a hybrid, predictive cost baselines combined with your agile burn rates, right? And some of the related tools practically we use here is your resource cost spreadsheet. Another is your resource assignment. Is a concrete record of who is assigned to do what work. Now, why is it important? It directly ties to determining your team requirements and also to discuss your responsibility. In the traditional environment example would be your project plan includes your resource assignment for each task in your WBS. And in an agile, the sprint backlog and Kanban boards will show resource assignment in real time. And in the hybrid, a high-level predictive assignment aligns with your rolling wave agile task ownership. Now, so let's put all of this together. The enablers, deliverables, and also tools, right? Enablers support diversity inclusion. The deliverables, your team charter. The tools we need here, virtual tools, collaboration platforms. Another enabler, appraisal, appraise your team skills. What are deliverables, your skill lists? What are the tools, your skill metrics? Another enabler, determine your team requirements. What are the deliverables here, your resource schedule, your pre-assignment, and your rates? What are some of the tools, your WBS, your HRO system? And also another enabler, consistently refresh your skills. And what are deliverables? Update your skill list. And then your tool here will be your training plans. Another enabler is to maintain knowledge transfer. And what are the deliverables? Your knowledge base. What are some of the tools? Your tech tools. And the next one will be discuss responsibility. And how do you do this? Deliverable will be your RASI, resource assignment. And then the tools will be your kickoff meeting and also your visual board. So for your exam, your PMP exams, you understand how those deliverables tools will support your task and enabler scenario. And for your real project, you want to use this mapping to design your PM toolkits to actually reinvent your wheel and get better in managing your projects. Let's take a look at your project teams. What's the project team? A project team is a set of individuals who would support the project manager to perform the project work and achieve its objective. So who makes up the project team? Your project team would include your project management staff, which is the planners, schedulers, cost controllers, risk managers, the PMO support. We have the project staff number 2, which is the people doing the technical work, engineers, the developers, the testers, the writers, the builders, etc. We also have number 3, which is the supporting experts like the legal, procurement, quality assurance, logistics, human resource. We also have number 4, which are the users or the customer rep. We define requirements and accept the work. We have the sellers, which are like the external vendors, your contracts for your product or services. We also have your business partners, external firms providing specialized support or strategic alignments, right? So a key point here is all team members are stakeholders, but not all stakeholders are team members. So for example, the public is your stakeholder in a city park project, but does not work on your project. Why does it matter? A high-performing project team is crucial. Project gets work done through people. If your team skills, your motivation, and interactions are not managed well, quality would drop, risk would rise, and schedules would slip. Let's also look at the core responsibility of the PM for the project team. According to your project resource management, you must, number 1, estimate and acquire people. Know what work is needed, know what skills you need, get the right people either internally or externally. Number 2, you want to estimate other resources, tools, equipment, software licenses, office space, travel, etc. Number 3, you want to develop the team. You want to train, you want to coach, you want to mentor, you want to build trust. You want to also strengthen competencies and also facilitate communication and collaboration. And then number 4, you want to manage and lead the team. You want to be able to track performance. You want to give feedback. You want to resolve issues and conflicts. And you want to manage changes with new members joining or also leaving. Let's look at the team composition. The team structures can vary. We could have dedicated team, part-time team, mixed. Dedicated team members work full-time on your project. Part-time team members split between your project and their daily jobs. Mixed, a core team plus part-timers or contractors. So who's on your team? Usually PM plus your PM staff plus individual contributors from various departments or vendors. How this looks in both a predictive, an agile, and also in a hybrid setting. So let's take a good example. So for instance, in the traditional, which some people call the predictive, in building a hospital, your team composition might look like full-time site manager, safety worker, engineers. Your part-time could be your legal advisor for permits, external contractors for electrical work. How you manage, you want to use a resource breakdown structure to define your roles. You want to have issue contracts to vendors like your sellers. You want to track resource usage with your MS project or your Primavera. And your team focus, that's your focus itself, which is the PM's focus, would be clear roles and responsibility, strict scheduling, hierarchical reporting. Practical deliverables here would be your RASI chart, your resource calendar, your contract agreements. Then in a hybrid environment, for instance, if we're doing like a product launch for a new wearable device, right, like phones, watches, right, you could see your team compositions would be your R&D lab team, dedicated predictive phase for hardware, your marketing, the UX, the agile sprint for digital campaigns, external suppliers for parts. And then how do you manage predictive schedule for manufacturing, agile scrum boards for design marketing, integrate your vendor schedules. And then your focus, that's the PM's focus, will be to balance formal approvals with flexibility and also ensure cross-team knowledge transfer. Now, some of the practical deliverables here will be your mixed Gantt chart or Kanban, your weekly coordination meetings, and also your virtual collaborative tools. Let us look at it from an agile perspective. For instance, if we are doing a software SaaS startup, right, your team compositions might look like one Scrum team member, developer, tester, UX, product owner, a part-time legal advisor for data privacy, an external API vendor. And how do you manage the team? The team is actually self-organizing. Roles are defined by your agile principles, your Scrum Master, your POs, your dev teams, daily stand-ups, and retrospective. Your PM focus, that's the project manager's focus, would be to protect your team from distraction. You want to facilitate collaboration. You want to remove blockers. Practical deliverables or tools would be your product backlog, PO's responsibility, your sprint backlog, your working agreement, your visual Kanban. Now, I'd like to tie all this together. And in tying all this together, what you must do, you want to estimate and acquire your team. What will be the deliverables? Resource plan, roles and responsibility document, and the tools will be your WBS, your skill metrics. What you must do, you want to develop your team, and how deliverables will be your team charter, your training plan, and the tools you're going to use here will be your team kickoff, your working agreement. Now, what you must do, number 3, will be to manage and improve, and your deliverables will be a performance report, your lesson learned. The tools here will be your feedback loop, your issue log. And then what you must do here is to maintain knowledge. And what are the deliverables? You want a knowledge transfer plan. And what are some of the tools? You need your wikis and your repositories. Another thing, again, what you must do, resolve issues, deliverables, conflict log. Your tools will be meeting facilitation templates. Now, your pro tips for real projects will be dedicated versus part-time. Don't assume everyone is 100% available. Adjust schedules for shared resources. External partners. Build clear contracts and communication lines. Virtual teams. You want to use tools like Slack, MS Project, Jira, and all of the rest. You want to keep the team engaged. You want to celebrate quick wins. You want to communicate vision. You want to handle conflicts early. Some of the key takeaway I would say here would be a project team is more than just a roster. It's a living system. People, processes, tools working together. Your job is to build, develop, and lead them so they can deliver no matter the approach, whether you're looking at the traditional, you're looking at the hybrid, or also the agile. Let's take a look at your project team members' requirements. Before you acquire or assign people to a project, you must first of all define your requirements. What skills, what competence, what capacity does your team need to achieve your project objective? Number 2, how do you avoid single point of failure? Number 3, What physical resources, equipment, tools, assets will your people need to do their work effectively? This is part of what we call your plan resource management process, which is covered in the PMBOK guide that aligns with the PMP ECHO task under the process and your people domain. So some of the key concepts here will be, number one, right skills and competence. You want to map out what work needs to be done. That's in your WBS, that's your work breakdown structure. You want to identify the skills needed to do each task. You want to check your available people who fits what are the gaps. And then number two, you want to avoid single point of failure, which is never rely on only one person to hold a critical knowledge. You want to use generalizing specialists. You want people with specialty, but also broad skills. For example, a developer who's great at back-end coding, but can also do front-end or QA if needed. You also need to look into your physical and your system resource. You want to identify what tools, tech, access of physical space your team will be needing. For instance, laptops, design softwares, VPN access, the lab space, cranes, test equipment. And why is this critical? In a predictive environment, which some people call the traditional, roles, tasks, and resource needs must be planned in detail upfront. A missed skill can cause costly delays. And in an agile environment, teams are cross-functional and self-organizing. You must balance specialization with flexibility. And in an hybrid environment, you want to blend formal resource plans with the agile capacity planning. And how does this work in different perspectives? I'm going to give you examples from the different perspective. For instance, in the traditional, which is a predictive, if we're doing a new office building construction, looking at the skills and roles, the WBS reveals we will need a structural engineer, we will need a site supervisor, we will need an electronical contractor, we'll need a HSE, that's the health and safety environment inspector. The PM does a skill inventory. It confirms internal staffs, it confirms your contractors. And then we have also your key single point of failure. Only one structural engineer knows local ceramic code. That's a risk, for instance. You want to train a junior or hire backup. Then for physical needs, a staff needs site access passes, safety gears, your cranes, your site trailers, and also your design software license. The deliverables could be your responsibility assignment matrix, which is your RASI chart, your resource breakdown structure, which is called your RBS, and then your resource management plan. In an agile environment, for example, in your SaaS development project, some of the skills here will be your Scrum team, back-end devs, front-end devs, QA, UX designers, your DevOps. One developer can jump into QA if needed, so generalizing specialist. You want to avoid single point of failure. That's the only person who knows the database. You want to train up a backup, or you want to use pair coding or pair programming. Then for physical needs, your Jira board, your vision control tools, your test environments, your VPNs for remote team members. Deliverables here or tools here will be your skill matrix. That's your T-shaped skill charts, your working agreement, your shared digital tools like your Jira boards and all. And then in a hybrid, for example, probably you want to do a new product launch, your physical product plus your app. What the skill sets, tools, you have predictive phase where your manufacturing engineers, your compliance, supply chain, and your agile phase, which will need your UX, UI designers. You also need your app developers, and you want to have your marketing creatives. And for single point of failure, the regulatory experts have a junior shadowing them. Only one packaging designer? No, you want to have a cross-trained someone in a basic design audit. And then for your physical needs, you need a lab space for prototype. You need a secure cloud storage for your designs. You also need collaboration platforms for your global teams. Some of the deliverables you would need here will be your integrated resource plan, predictive, plus your sprint capacity plan, which is agile. You also need your ride log for risk. That's your single point of failure. You also need your shared drives, your video conferencing, your secure VPN. Typical deliverables would look like, what do you do? Define needed skills. What are the deliverables? Skill metrics. For example, your Excel, your MS project, or Teams, or shared documents. What do? You want to identify risk, which is a single point. And then what are deliverables? Your ride log. And then what are some of the tools? Your project risk register. What do? You want to match skills to tasks. What will be the deliverables here? Your resource breakdown structure. And also the tools needed will be your WBS and software. What do you do again then we have your planned fiscal needs and what will be the deliverable, your resource requirement plan. And then what are some of the tools, your procurement IT checklist. And then the next of them is to build flexibility. And what do we need here? Cross-training plans. The tools needed will be here, your skills chart or also your training tracker. Some of the key takeaway here will be clearly define what work needs to be done and then map out who you need. Don't rely on only one person for a critical skill. Always build a backup and transfer your knowledge. Don't forget the physical and digital resources your team needs to do the work. Adapt how you document and adjust those requirements based on your delivery approach. More upfront for predictive, more rolling wave for hybrid, and more fluid for agile. For your exams, the PMP loves scenario about missing skills, overloaded staff, unplanned fiscal resources. Always check. Did you plan for the people and what they need to succeed? Show that you balance deep specialists with generalizing specialists. Tie it up in your resource management plan. Let's take a look at stakeholders. We're going to be discussing who are stakeholders, the processes you must follow, you want to identify, you want to plan, you want to manage. We're going to look at the key concepts like conflicting needs, early engagement, clear expectations. We're also going to look at how does all of this play out in a traditional, in a hybrid, and also in an agile setting. So what exactly is a stakeholder and who is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is any individual, group, or organization that may affect the project or be affected by the project or perceived itself to be affected by the project. Some of the key points you want to note here is stakeholders can be internal and also external. They can help or hinder your project's outcome, and they might be actively involved or just indirectly impacted. Stakeholders versus team members. Project team members are stakeholders, but not all stakeholders do project work. For instance, a city council that funds your project is a stakeholder. Local residents are stakeholders too, but not all of them are in your work team. Why stakeholder really matters? Projects succeed or fail not just on technical delivery, but how well people's expectations are met. So if you ignore stakeholders, you might deliver a great project or a great product that nobody wants or even uses. Conflicting priorities pop up at the worst time, especially at delivery. So for instance, in a new IT system go live, but frontline employees aren't trained or consulted, you would have low adaptation, wasted money. Let us take a look at the core stakeholder processes. In the PMBOK or the PMP Echo shows that you must, number one, identify stakeholders. Who cares, who influences, who could block or boost your project. Do this early and keep it updated. Stakeholders always change. Some of the tools you need to have or use here are stakeholder register and also your stakeholder map. Number two, you want to plan your stakeholder engagement. You want to analyze. You want to look into the power, interests, and also you want to decide how to engage them, inform, consult, collaborate, and negotiate. Some of the tools we use here in planned stakeholder engagement could be your power interest grid, also your engagement matrix, which is your engagement assessment matrix. Number three, you want to manage your stakeholder engagement. You want to keep stakeholder informed, involved, and also aligned. You want to address conflict and you want to also address expectations. You want to adapt your approach as you learn more. Some of the tools you're going to use here is your communication plan, a feedback loop, regular check-in, and also monitor stakeholder engagement. Is engagement working? Are stakeholders satisfied? Adjust strategy if attitude shifts. Some of the things you want to look at here, some of the tools are your survey, your stakeholder feedback reports. So why stakeholders often have conflicts? Different interests. That's number one. Different vision. Also different power levels. So let's take a look at the different interests. For instance, the CFO wants cost cuts. The end users want premium features. Another could be different vision. Executives may want speed to market. Compliance team want rigorous testing. Different power levels. Some stakeholders have the authority to stop your project. Your job, get them involved early. Clarify their needs. Align their expectations. Keep communication open. How this plays out in either a traditional or a hybrid or even an agile setting. So let's take, for instance, the traditional, which is also called a predictive. For instance, if we're building a new highway, stakeholders could be your internal, stakeholders will be your PM, your project team, your PMO, also your finance. External stakeholders could be your local residents, your city government, your contractors and environmental groups. Early public consultations, legal sign-offs and permits, weekly status reports to the city council, stakeholder register, and your power interest kept up to date. The best practice here is that predictive projects need formal stakeholder sign-off at each stage or at each milestone. Let's take a look at it from a hybrid setting. For instance, you're doing a new medical device with an app, right? Stakeholders, internal stakeholders here will be your R&D, regulatory compliance, social, your software development team, your marketing team. And external will be your hospitals, patients, we have the health authorities, suppliers. Now, in application, in the predictive approach for the regulatory trials, you want clear sign-offs with FDAs. You want also, in the agile approach for the patient app, you want users provide feedback in beta testing. Engagement plan must bridge both formal regulatory updates and also the iterative users engagement. So best practice for hybrid would be to keep communication consistent across streams. You don't let your predictive stakeholders feel left out during your agile iteration. And then we can look at the agile, for instance. Example could be a fintech startup building a payment app. The stakeholders here would be internal, the Scrum team, the product owner, the senior exec, while the external stakeholders would be end users, compliance lawyers, the app store partners. In looking at application, the product owner represents stakeholders' needs in the backlog, while continuous user feedback sections like sprint review, and we'll also have key stakeholders join demos to give real-time output or input. Best practice. In an agile, the product owner is critical for balancing competing needs and keeping the team aligned. So let's take a look at the practical tools and deliverables. What to do? Identify stakeholders. The deliverables will be the stakeholder register. Some of the tools here will be brainstorming and then subject matter expert. Another what to do will be to analyze stakeholder, and the deliverables will be your power interest grid. And one of the techniques or tools will be your stakeholder mapping. Another what to do will be to plan engagement, and your deliverables will be your stakeholder engagement plan, and also the tools and techniques will be your engagement metrics. Another what to do here, manage engagement. Deliverables will be your communication plan, meetings, minutes, and then the tools will be facilitation, conflicts, resolution. And then the next of what to do will be your monitor engagement. Here, some of the deliverables will be your feedback reports and also surveys. Stakeholder satisfaction metrics will be done. Let's take a look at some of the industry examples. In construction, for instance, a local resident opposes road widening due to noise. The PM must negotiate mitigation measures. In a healthcare, for instance, the doctor wants new features in the ERH, and the IT wants a phased rollout. Nurses wants training first. And then in a tech industry, the users want more features. Dev team wants more technical depth. PO must balance this. And then in terms of government industry, elected officials want results before elections, and compliance team demands audit first. Some of the key takeaway here is engage early and often. Don't surprise stakeholders. Map influence and interest. You don't communicate the same way with everyone. You also want to monitor and adapt. Stakeholders change, so does their power and also their influence. You also want to communicate early. You want to always define success criteria early. You want to also balance conflict. Take visions before they become costly disagreements. For the PMI exam team, you want to look at scenario questions like, how do you handle conflicting stakeholders' requirements? A key stakeholder is disengaged. What do you do? Your stakeholders request late changes. How do you respond? Now, most project issues are people issues. Nail stakeholders' identification and engagement. You build trust, you reduce surprises, you deliver value that actually is wanted. We're going to be looking at the stakeholder identification, what it really means. Stakeholder identification is the process of identifying all individual groups or organizations who may affect the project, be affected by the project, perceive themselves to be affected by the project. And this is the starting point for stakeholder management. You can't manage or engage stakeholders you haven't identified. So why identify stakeholder early? Stakeholders have the greatest ability to influence the project at the beginning. That's when changes are least costly. Missing key stakeholders can lead to misunderstood requirements, unmet needs, and also rework. So stakeholders can also be your biggest supporters if you engage them properly. So what do we do? According to PMIs, that's the PMBOK and the ECHO, what we need to do is to identify all relevant stakeholders early, analyze their interest in the project, the level of their power and influence, interdependence with other stakeholders, and also potential positive and negative impact. You want to keep the list updated. Stakeholders change over time. We've seen that earlier on. And then you want to use lesson learned, templates, and historical stakeholder lists to help. Now, let's also look at some of the key documents where stakeholder information connects. The business case. Mention major stakeholders like your sponsors, customers, regulators, benefits management plan. Who benefits from the project? These are stakeholders. Stakeholder register, the master list that contains the names, the roles, the interests, the influence, engagement strategy. Communication management plan. It specifies what information each stakeholder needs, what, when, how. And then stakeholder engagement plan defines how you would engage each stakeholder. Also, we look at the change log or the issue log or the requirement document. These reveals new stakeholders, for instance, a new regulator, a new interested user group, for instance. So let's take a look at some of the practical concepts. Stakeholder identification is not one and done deal. Keep reviewing your list as your project faces changes, new people join or leave the organization, unexpected issue or opportunity emerges. Also, leverage existing assets. For instance, you want to use the organizational process assets, which some people call OPAs or which some people call internal environment. Stakeholder lists from similar past projects could help. Also, enterprise environmental factors, which we also call the EEFs. For instance, your organizational charts, legal frameworks, cultural factors, etc. You could see them there. Now, how to identify stakeholders? Common techniques. One could be brainstorming with your project team, consulting SMEs, subject matter experts, sponsors, functional managers, also reviewing your contracts, regulations, external partnership agreements, stakeholder analysis meetings are some of the common techniques. Interview or surveys with known stakeholders to find hidden ones. Let's take a look at the traditional, hybrid, and also agile and how all of this plays out. For the traditional, for instance, in a predictive environment, let's say, for instance, a new highway construction, when stakeholders identified at initial phase, they begin design phase. Who? Local government agencies, landowners, nearby residents, also environmental activists, construction workers, suppliers, funding partners. So how to manage them? You want to create a detailed stakeholder register. You want to do a power interest grid. And ongoing, you want to add stakeholders as environmental impact assessment surfaces, new interested parties come up. Deliverables here will be your stakeholder register, your stakeholder maps, updated during gated reviews. Let's take a look at the hybrid. A global product rollout or physical product plus a digital app. Stakeholders identified upfront for hardware predictive and then consistently for the digital features, which is agile. Who? The R&D, the supply chain partners, the retail partners, the end users, the digital UX tech group, the data privacy regulators. So how to manage them? You want to use both formal stakeholder list, which is predictive, and the agile feedback loop to spot new stakeholders. Ongoing, the app reviews reveal new user segments, add to the stakeholder register. Deliverable, you have combined stakeholder register updated in your change log or sprints. Let's take a look at the agile environment. From the agile environment, such as like a fintech startup, stakeholders identified at product backlog creation. Who? Your customers, the product owner, development team, compliance team, security specialists, app store partners. How do we manage them? Product owner constantly updates stakeholders based on their user stories, user research, and also feedback. Ongoing, your sprint reviews and demos often surfaces new stakeholders, for instance, in your new integration partners. Deliverables for this would be stakeholder register is lean, updated visually on your agile boards or in your Jira. For instance, let's take a look at all of that. Stakeholders, sponsor, what's their interest? Ensure return on investment, budget control. What's their influence? It could be high. The engagement strategy, weekly updates, decision meetings. How about for your local community? Their interest is minimal disruption. What's their influence? Medium. The engagement strategy, for instance, public meetings and also surveys. Regulators, their interest is compliance, their influence is high, and their engagement strategy is formal reports, inspection. End users, easy, interest is easy to use product. The influence, medium. And then the engagement strategy is beta testing, feedback, workshops. Practically in different industry, for instance, in construction, stakeholder identification is to identify utility companies for roadworks, not just residents. While in healthcare, you want to identify patient advocacy group early for medical device trials. For IT industry, for instance, you want to identify legal and cybersecurity teams early for data privacy. For government, you want to identify political stakeholders with power to provide funding or to approve your funding. So some of the key takeaways here would be to identify stakeholders early and continuously. Don't assume the list is final. You want to document your interest, the influence, the interdependency, and how they impact success. You want to also update your stakeholder register and use it to drive your communication plan and also your engagement plan. You want to also leverage organizational assets like your lesson learned, templates, organizational charts. You want to also use power, interest grids, also your engagement metrics, and also your stakeholder mapping. For your PMI exam tip, on the exam, scenarios would be like a new stakeholder is discovered mid-project. What do you do? Answer, update the stakeholder register and adjust the engagement plan. How do you find hidden stakeholders? The answer will be you want to use brainstorming, expert judgment, and also interviews. Now, for real life projects, many stakeholder conflicts happens because they are never identified or heard. Keep your stakeholder list alive, treat it like a dynamic map that grows and shifts as the project evolves.